goes around the church and just checks for that I would forget and then get chewed out for. He covers my rear end, which is a lot. So I just want to thank you, Frank, so much. You're a proud board member. He's like our middle person for our board. So when we start going at it, he keeps it in line. So I just want to go back to real quick about the World War II Museum. Owen Garrison fought in World War II. And if you've ever met somebody, I had family, my grandfather, my great uncles, and they're all gone now. They lived until they were in their late 80s, early 90s, and they passed. One of my great uncles actually recorded a month before he died of cancer his story that went to National Archives. His name is Rocco Del Calo. We used to call him Buddy, so it was Uncle Buddy. And Uncle Carmen, he fought and with my grandfather in Italy, and they both had Purple Hearts and all kinds of stories. And a lot of times I would just kind of shuck that off. But I really, if I could rewind the tape, I'd love to know more about what they experienced, both good and bad. And I'll tell you something that just floored me yesterday. I'm sitting here talking to a man who put his life on the line. He's 93 years old. He's speaking to people and telling his story. And he looks dead at my eyes and says, listen. I said, listen. First of all, I said to him, I said, I tip my hat to you. I give all honor to you, man. I said, because without you doing what you're doing, I said, we would live in a different world. And he goes, Reverend? He says, what you're doing takes more courage than what I did. Yeah. I almost dropped to my knees and bawled like a little baby. I didn't know how to handle that. Not because of me, I'm talking about all of us. He's talking about all of us. He's a believer too. The spiritual warfare is real. And if you don't know what that means, stick around, we'll talk to you about it, you'll experience it firsthand. That there is a war going on in the spiritual realm through us as human beings. It's pretty wild. It almost sounds like a science fiction movie, right? Yeah. Every time we get together and do church, every time we talk to one another, every time a sermon's going on, there's all kinds of things that can get in the way. This man knew, because not only about the spiritual realm, but he also knows of our passion to help people who are either going through addictions or recovery, because he worked along with his wife, I believe, what was it, EMT? Was it, honey?
Yeah, he was a police chief.
He was a police chief and she was an EMT or something. And they brought many people over the years to the hospital with overdoses. They've seen it. Almost more so casualties that way than it was in the war. So just to give you a picture of what's going on here. So before we hit this sermon, I want everybody to understand that this isn't just a church, this is a movement. And we're not just going to sit here and play, well, we got nice snacks and won't you come and we'll entertain you and make you feel good and all that. We have a lot of things that we're going to be collectively involved in. Some people may not want to do that. I'm not mad at them. But that's the journey that God has put this church on. So, if you're with me, you can say amen. Amen. If not, I love you anyway, but the show's got to go on, okay? So, poverty mentality. How many of you have heard that expression by just a show of hands? Just a few. Okay, good. So this sermon will be a little bit more fresh. So poverty mentality. Let me ask you a question. Well, I'll give you an example of what happened the other night. I get a little stir crazy because we have one car. And my wife works in Vineland. Sometimes she takes the car for today, sometimes she doesn't. This day she happened to do it because it was convenient. And I said, okay. And I had a ton of work that I was working on and doing all this stuff, but I was getting crazy. And I said to her, I said, I don't care where we need to go tonight. I don't care if we go to the mall. I just need to walk. I need to get out of the house. I need to walk. So it's like darn near 9 o'clock at night now. And I'm like, what's open? Lowe's. That's it. We'll go to Lowe's. Boy, you've hit old age when you start thinking of places like Lowe's to just walk around. Yeah, I'm just kidding. But we went there and we just walked around for a little bit and was looking at stuff, and it reminded me of the sermon Last year, I was looking around our house that we inherited from my mom, who was actually my grandfather's, and my mom had it, and then she gave it to us. And my grandfather took good care of the house, but he really didn't update it a lot. And there's a lot of things that need repairs. And extra money in Pastor's pocket right now is like 1 penny. All right? So, last summer, I'm praying. And God showed me, he's like, I want you to go through the house, and I want you to write everything down that you feel you need to change. And then I put in this thing called Trello, which is like a project management base. It's like electronic like stickies. And I wrote everything down in it. My wife and I prayed over it. By the time the end of the summer came, I went back and revisited the list. 3/4 of it was done.
Amen.
Now, why am I saying this? I'm not turning this into a money message, okay? And I'm not saying it's all about you can have whatever you want if you just rub the genie, the Jesus lamp, and you'll have, because I've seen some videos online about poverty mentality, even from pastors preaching it, saying, hey, God wants you prosperous, you can have anything you want. That's not always true. Because some things you get may not be of Him. It may take you away from Him. But He knows my heart, and I want to fix the house. I don't need golden toilets. Well, that would be nice. You ever seen the ones that light up at the bottom? It's pretty cool, huh? They have like the lights. Yeah, I know it's an ADD moment, but they do. They have like these little lights and it's like neon, right? No, anyway. So, I don't need all that.
No more lesbian.
Yeah, and you're not going to fix it, right? So, I look at all that though, and I say, okay, these are things that we need fixing. But then there's no money, there's no people. Then all of a sudden He puts a person in my life and says, yeah, and all of a sudden, somehow, some way, extra money starts coming. And by the time the end of summer came, we were ripping things out and throwing things away and changing the oven that was 25 years old, and the refrigerator had died, and all kinds of stuff. Flooring that, we were rocking the 70s, like shag rug, orange burst kind of, color. I mean, the only thing we were missing was a disco ball in the middle, It's cosmetic, but it was a pain because this thing was like eating up vacuum cleaners left and right because we have 2 big dogs and we have 5 people in the house. I'll just leave it at that, okay? Little than me. So all these changes, I'm sitting there, the first thing that comes out of our mouth is, how are we going to do this? How are we going to fix this? How are we going to handle this? We don't have the money, we don't have this, we don't have that. How many of you here have said that over and over to yourself? Well, I just can't do this. If Mary was here, she'd remind me of Eeyore, which, by the way, you got to see the Christopher Robin movie. It's amazing. It wasn't just a kid's movie. There was a lot of deep truth in that stuff. Wow, it was an amazing movie. And so Eeyore, the character, he's like, oh, well, guess it wasn't meant to be, And that's how he talked. The same thing we do with poverty mentality. Oh, well, I guess I'll just never get past this job. I'll always be in debt. I'll never be skinny. I'll never be in shape. Guess I'll never have that car. Guess I'll never learn the Bible. Well, I'll never get married again. Right? And that's exactly what it sounds like when you have poverty mentality. It sounds exactly that way. What happens is you start to look at your situation and you say, judging on the situation, nothing can change. And because we're going to talk about Gideon today, one of my favorite characters in the Bible, and how he looked at his circumstances. It was the first thing he did that went wrong. So as we go through this, I just want to throw something out at you before we continue. I know, wow, you can't twist stuff to make it work the way you want it to, but there's a lot of things that I believe we don't have because we haven't asked and we haven't believed. I'm not saying everything, I'm just saying I think we give up on God way too quick. Did you catch that? I think we give up on God way too quick. We already write him off and saying, well, that ain't going to happen. That just can't be. Never gonna be. I'll never do that again. That chapter's over, forget it. And we've written off God's power. So when you look at your circumstances and you think to yourself, okay, like I'm living here, I've got this, I've got that. If you guys knew me personally back in 1998 and see if I could just like get like what you were doing like on a tablet and you just go like this and like roll over video and you say like all these like fast moving things and they come to today, your jaw would drop. Because I had 3 mailing addresses that year. I was separated from my first wife. I lived with my mother and my stepfather who were putting their house up for sale. We're going to move to Delaware. I had no car, so I used my mom's because she had an extra one in the garage that she was paying for a lease because she's a sales rep, so they already gave her a car. And then I lived with I slept on the couch with my grandmother's in Maple Shade because I worked in Trenton. And then twice I met this beautiful blonde that I would sleep on her couch. So I had 3 mailing addresses that year. And I had no place to really put my head and say, this is where I belong, this is where I'm going. And to see and fast forward all to today, if I had that mentality and kept it, none of this would be. Now, okay, that's like, great, Steve, you're boasting. No, I want to give God the glory, because I was there.
Amen.
That's what I'm trying to say to you, and it wasn't that long ago that I was still there. And some days I get there, and so once in a while it creeps back, and it's like, oh, well, you know, if we just had more people, if we just had more money in the offering, if we just had this, we could do that. I get people approach me about stuff, and they're like, Pastor, can we have help with this? And I'm like, I only got 20 people, I can't. That's exactly what I just did. That's exactly what I just did. When he started Code Blue with this church in Millville. But what I did was I said, no. We can't do it. See what I mean? It creeps back every so often. You think you got rid of it, and it comes back like a yo-yo. And I'm here to say that when we start looking at our circumstances, we drown. We drown fast. We drown real quick. Because we forget who we are in Christ. We forget what the Word of God says. And then what we say to ourselves is we start telling ourselves the same story over and over again. I can't, I won't, it ain't happening. Tell yourself that story every day, and what are you going to start living? Your story. Common sense, right? But that's what you believe, and that's a story you're peddling. That's what you're going to do. So, this next clip is just a small little, like, 1-minute video clip that is from a guy named Sid Roth. It's supernatural, you know. And once in a while, it's an interesting show, but it's a little out there at times. But this one guy was talking about poverty mentality. Take a listen to what he has to say. Next slide, buddy. There you go.
You had, or what many people have, a poverty mindset.
That's right.
Now, explain to me how with this poverty mindset, there's actually been studies that after a few generations explain that.
Yeah, you know, we know, and the Bible tells us how that if something happens for several generations, that it will continue on in our children. And that's not because God is cursing us. It's what this study reveals. It says that if 3 or 4 generations of children grow up in welfare, grow up in destitution, that by the 4th generation, they come into the world hardwired for that kind of life, and it'll be very unlikely that they will ever get out of poverty by the time several generations have gone through this.
But there is light at the end.
Oh yes, there is.
Of the tunnel.
There is light. Well, my great-granddaddy was an alcoholic. My dad was an alcoholic, so therefore I should be an alcoholic. Well, people in my family have, molested this person, but molest this person, so therefore I'm probably going to be molested. Well, this one never went to college, this one never went to college, guess what? I'm not going to college. Do you see the repeat here? And the mentality is, I'm just going to accept that. That's just the way it is. I would love to give out shirts that say that, because many people proclaim that. That's just the way it is. It's never going to change. Your life is going to stay the same from now until you die. Congratulations. Well, isn't that thrilling to live? If you really believe that where you are today is never going to change, that this is the end, this is the rest of your life, please see me afterwards. And by the time we get done this, I hope that mindset changes. Because I'm going to pray over you like never before. It is a mindset. And listen, the older I get, and I just hit 48, and some people are like, oh, it's young. I'm starting to feel a little bit lately. And you know, I'm also starting to challenge myself more because I'm like, wait a minute. It's getting harder to change. Because every year that goes by, I get more and more kind of dug in to what I believe. And if you have a habit, you smoke, you drink, whatever, and you've been doing it for a long time, it's harder to break it as you get older. Because you've been doing it for so long, right? Now, Gerda, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I guess I do. How long have you been at Planet Fitness?
Since January.
Since January, okay? And I'm proud of you, by the way. You're showing up pastor. I'm going to be there one day, right? And so you had to say to yourself at that time that you were going to exercise and you were going to, you know, start doing what you were doing, right? To stay on that path for even as long as you have since January, you beat the odds just now. Because most people, by the time they start that New Year's resolution, what happens? In a few weeks, they're right back to where they started. And so, especially at her age, and I don't mean it insultingly, but at her age to do something like that, it's even harder. Because she could take the easy way out and just say, well, I'm older, so therefore, I don't need to do that. Who do I have to impress? What do I have to do, you know? She's saying, no, I'm going to take care of myself. And it means that much to me that I can start even now. Owen Garrison, at 93 years old, looked at me and said, every day, I pray that I wake up learning something new. Blew my mind. 93 years old. And Ma, since I've said your age over and over again, people know how old you are. Ma has said the same thing to us in our board meetings, in our different times that we've been together. And she said, I always want to learn. I could be wrong, Steve. There's times where I might think of something where I've believed something for a long time and it might not be totally right. And I'm willing to listen. And so she's even has that mindset open. She's not accepting something that's dictating to her and saying, no, that's the way it is, forget it. There is no future for you. Here's what you know. And until you die, this is the way you live. Most people go to their grave with that mentality. That's not what I believe God calls us to do. And if a 93-year-old can look me in the eyes and say, I learn something new every day, I better have that mindset. Because back then, it was black, white, and that was it. You either get a burger or fish, and that's it. There was no, well, if you like to customize that, would you like to maximize this and do all that? There wasn't none of that. You had one electric company to deal with. You didn't have solar power and wind and all that. You had one. My goodness, when we had the movie theater here at the Cumberland movie theater, you had 2 movies to choose from. That was it. I like this one today. There wasn't no 16. It was either one or the other. God gives us that freedom to expand our mind, to change our mind. And even at an older age, we can still make changes toward Him, toward His will, and not look at the circumstances. Who's with me here right now? Amen. Is anybody with me? Yes. Did I lose you guys? No. I know it's hot. Got the air on, we got the fans, okay? But I want to pump some iron into this message here. Get next slide, son. So Gideon, his name actually means he who cuts down. We're going through the book of Judges, and we're looking at these different leaders that God raises up, and the same cycle keeps happening. The nation of Israel they sin, they cry out to God. God raises up a leader and says, okay, here's your Savior. And then they repeat process, well, after peace for so many years, and they repeat process all over again. And you'd think they would get it by now, right? No. But Gideon, we're going to go through the next couple of weeks about Gideon because his story is so deep. And a lot of people talk like kid stories. It's like, little Gideon, like, let me tell you something. There's many of us that can could side with Gideon. It means he who cuts down. While Gideon does not look like he has much to offer at the time he was called, in the end, he would be responsible for cutting down the enemies of God's people. It was built into his name and he didn't know it. He didn't get it. Because when we look at this, the first couple paragraphs of the scripture, he didn't get it. Let's go to it, son. Yep, that's for you, Frank. Okay, guys, I'm going to kind of move over here a little bit. All right, so those of you who are with us. So we're looking at Judges chapter 6, okay? And we're going to go into chapter 6, or sorry, it's actually verse 1. And we're going to pick it up from here, where again the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. What a great thing to have next to your name. The Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and for 7 years he gave them into the hands of the Midianites. And because of the power of Midian was so oppressive, the Israelites prepared shelters for themselves in mountain clefts, caves, and strongholds. Whenever the Israelites planted their crops, the Midianites, Amalekites, and other eastern people invaded the country. They camped on the land and ruined the crops all the way to Gaza, and did not spare a living thing for Israel, neither sheep nor cow nor donkeys. They came up with their livestock and their tents like swarms of locusts. It was impossible to count them on their camels. They invaded the land to ravage it. Midian so impoverished the Israelites that they cried out to the Lord for help. See, don't let your life go in a situation where you want to do all this sin and then cry out to him. Because there's a lot of repercussion that comes with it in the middle of it. When the Israelites cried out to the Lord because of Midian, he sent them a prophet who said, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I brought you up out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. I rescued you from the hand of the Egyptians, and I delivered you from the hand of all your oppressors. I drove them out before you and gave you their land. I said to you, I am the Lord your God. Do not worship the gods of the Amorites in whose land you live. But you have not listened to me." The angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak in Ophrah that belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, I believe that is, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. So that's where it stops. We're going to see next week about that whole conversation he has. But here's what I want to show you. I want to show you what he was looking at. What was staring him in the face. How many of you, if you want to be really transparent, I know I will be, and my wife, have you ever been bullied? Whether it's in school, whether it's in a job, wherever. Have you been bullied?
Yeah.
I know I have. So here they are. They're the Israelites are doing all this stuff to try to get food for themselves and do all this work. And then after that, the Midianites come and steal it all and go. And they do it over and over and over again. So the Israelites finally get the memo and they cry out to God and they say, "We need help," which is exactly what God's been waiting for them to say. And then he says, "Okay, I'm going to give you some help." But in Gideon's conversation that we'll go into in the future, he doesn't understand who God is. He's only looking at his situation, and I'm going to take you through the backdrop here a little bit. Let me, next slide, buddy. Now this one I got to get up for. All right? Hold that thought. So there's three things that Gideon's circumstances look like. One of them is poverty, one of them is persecution, and one of them is powerlessness. So, who's got good eyes? Somebody got good eyes? Anyone? Jason? You got glasses? You want to come up here and read this real quick? Because I don't want to leave the camera. People think that we're not filming. So I just need you to read, buddy.
Back up.
Back up.
Your whole belly button.
I know. Pizza was good.
What am I reading here?
The first one that says poverty, I'll read the other two.
Wheat was usually laid out on a special piece of ground prepared for just that purpose. The ground was very hard and usually circular in shape. Threshing floors were located on top of hills where there would be more wind. The grain would be poured out on the ground, and oxen pulling a threshing sled called a norig would walk over the grain. It consisted of 3 stone rollers embedded with pieces of iron that would break and cut the grain. After the process, which broke the hard shell around the kernel, men would take the winnowing fans and toss the grain into the air. The lighter husk would be blown away by the wind, while the heavier grain would fall back to earth. The fact that Gideon is threshing grain by hand indicates that he had very little grain to work with, and it was a time of poverty.
Okay, so translation. There's a way that they do this where they take the grain and there's a certain way that they break it, and then when they fluff it up into the air, if I got this right, when they fluff it up to the air, what's not the grain heads kind of blows away. It's like the little chaff they call it, and then the kernels fall to the ground. So it's kind of like a sifting, right? But because of the way, how little Gideon had, it gave you an idea of how much they didn't have, because they had so much taken from them. So what little he did have, he tried to do the best he could with, because it's all he had. Some people have a poverty mentality, and what they do is they hold on to things, and they keep it for themselves. And I don't care if they've come up to new things, they keep it because they fear not having it. They fear not having any more than what they've already seen. So what do? They hold on to it so that it never feels like they've lost anything. You can also have a poverty mentality even having a lot. Because in your mind, you could be born with all kinds of wealth, and then it's not good enough, and you think that you're poor because you need so much more, and you could do this whole process even being wealthy. See, so there's not a limit to this. So when you look at the other 2 things that he's talking about here, one of them is persecution. It says Gideon was hiding while he threshed because he knew the Midianites would take the small amount of grain he had if they knew about it. So Gideon and his people were suffering under the lash of intense persecution. So he had to go and find places to do this, that he could hide what he had. Now, he was being smart about it because he knew it was coming. But I dare to say about our lives, how many times do we hide because we feel that the enemy's coming? And every time we're on our heels. And every time that we think we're starting to make headway, another bill comes. An unexpected bill comes, and all of a sudden, wham, we thought we were going to get ahead, and now all of a sudden the electric bill says, by the way, we just read your meter, and we read it wrong, and you owe like $900 like now, or we shut your electric off, because that happened to me. I'm probably the only one, but it happened to me. Remember that, honey?
Someone.
Yeah. And they read our meter and said, ooh, we messed up. And how are you going to pay us back? We work on that. But I couldn't. Didn't have it. So I had to go back and call out the Heavenly Daddy and say, Lord, this is yours. This isn't my problem. This is yours. You take care of the birds of the air and the grass of the field. How much more us? That I need your help. And one way or another, negotiating and everything, we got it down to where it needed to be, thanks to my wife. And now, my electric bill is $5 because we have solar power.
Amen. Yes.
But I had to believe, let me tell you that story. So for the past 5 years, I've made my annual phone call to Solar City, trying to figure out if I can get solar power. And they kept coming back to me, and they would look at the Google Maps, and they would see all the green around it and say, forget it. So I had way too many trees. So every year, I would call up the electric company and have them cut some trees down, because if by the way, if you don't know this, if you have a house and you have trees and the branches are in the wires, you can call them and have the trees removed. and they'll do it for nothing. They knocked about, I think, 15 or 16 trees off of our property in 2 years. Zero cost. And it wasn't until this past year where I made a phone call again, and everything in my blood said they're going to deny me. And all the circumstances came together for such a time as this, and it took me 5 months. And we have solar panels now on our roof of our home. I'm not saying this, guys, to say, oh, look at this guy. I'm saying that I bought into it too. I kept saying, no way. They're not going to do it. I got too much shade. My credit isn't good. I kept with all the poverty mentality stuff that you could throw at it, and I negated the power of God. And I'm telling you, we have it right within us if we call it out.
Amen.
I told you about how I used to, feel about the church, especially in the early days, where I was like Eeyore. Mary was totally right. I didn't believe what I was selling. I'm up here preaching to people and I'm going, I don't believe this. Because look at my life. Like this? And I'm trying to, to talk to people and say, hey, you want this Jesus, look at my life. I wasn't believing it. I didn't see it. But I had to go forward and say, okay, I believe in you, Lord. This is your work, not mine. And when that mentality started to change, it started to shift how I felt about things. So I can't look at the circumstance, I have to keep going with the mission. Your circumstances don't dictate your mission. I don't care where you are in life, young or old, retired or fully immersed, whatever it is, if God's put you on a mission to do something, your circumstances doesn't drive it. It's what you do in the circumstances. It's who you call on. Do you know how many people here, let alone in Cumberland County, have a poverty mentality? A lot. They feel like they just can't get out of it. And the system is built that way, unfortunately, that many people, it's easier for them to collect stuff than it is to try to get out of it because we haven't given them viable options. But I'm here to tell you that some people said, forget all that. I'm going to start my own company anyway. And they've done it. Because they didn't listen to the line. I'm not saying social services is bad. Believe me. I've been on them and I've used it. I know people have been on it. But if you look past all that and follow what God's telling you to, it doesn't matter. Whether you're on it, not on it, whatever, go forward with what He calls you to do. Don't look and say, well, Lord, I can't do this. Lord, I can't start a church because I don't have any kind of money to do it. We had nothing. Terry, that's here with us today, was part of our original group. We were meeting as a little small group in our living room of our house. I had no idea how this was going to happen. The board from our old church says, okay, Steve, after nagging us for 9 years, you're finally free to go start your church in Millville. And I'm going, really? Who? I don't know how to do this. Pastor Bruce was like, well, you had 9 years to figure it out. Go! And I'm like, well, where do we meet? What do we do? What do we call it? I had nothing. It was like, small group of Steve. I had no idea. Just follow them. We had zero. I didn't even have a bank account. I had no idea how we would collect funds. But God, one step at a time, led us where we needed to be to start it. 1 inch at a time. When you look at the next slide, buddy. Tony Robbins says, it's not the lack of resources that cause failure. It's the lack of resourcefulness that causes failure. Wow. And when I heard him say that one day, I was like, man, that's deep. And then I went right back to the Word and I said, I missed it. It was right there in the Word. That's where he got it. He just ain't saying it. Because in circumstances that you read over and over again in the Bible, it looked like everything was about to cave in. But God. And He used people who weren't the ones that the world picked and said, oh yeah, the smartest, brightest, good looking, lots of money, whatever. No, he takes the scrub of the scrubs and says, I'm going to lift you up to make the world look foolish. Now, I'm not saying that, you can't accept Christ because you look the part. I'm saying that he took many people that nobody would give a shot to and says, this is how I can make you guys look foolish, because you're looking at the outside appearance. When you go to look at the story of Samuel and when he was picking out the next king because Saul had gone sideways, Saul looked the part of a king. But he failed because he forgot that he needed to adhere to and obey God. Saul he was taller, he looked king-like, and when the people cried out for it, God said, very well, I'll give you a king, here he is. And they went, wow, pretty impressive. But then he decides to disobey God over and over again, and God says, I'm ripping the kingdom from you. He gets a teenager who's a shepherd boy, who's the run of the litter, and picks him to rule Israel. But it wasn't until 10, 15 years after that before it finally happened. So Samuel's looking at all these brothers, and he's going to Jesse. He's like, okay, give me your brothers. Well, he looks like the part. And God says, nope, that's not the one. He looks at the other one. Nope, that's not the one. It's got to be this one. He looks really good. Nope, not the one. You got any other brothers? Well, there's one over there. Little shepherd boy. He probably stinks to no end. Small little guy over there. You want to go take a look at him. And God says, that's the one. But the circumstances that were under, he was in a smelly sheep pen, I'm sure. Little did he know that he was going to be risen to be king. Everything in your life is training for something else. Did you know that?
Yes.
Everything. Even the worst of worst. You hear me out there in Facebook land? Everything that you're going through, every trial, every pain, whatever it may be, is training for